Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we're talking about trash, but believe me, this isn't just any old garbage story. We're going to unpack how millions of tons of Canadian trash ended up at the center of a huge international trade dispute, pitting the state of Michigan against the province of Ontario and even threatening to shake up the entire North American trade agreement. So to really get what's going on with this garbage war, we actually have to start in the middle of the action, with the Supreme Court showdown. Let's jump to February 2026. This was a month that just completely changed the game for trade in North America.
Okay, so on February 20th, the Supreme Court hands the White House a major defeat, ruling that its emergency-based tariffs were illegal. But you have to watch what happens next. The timeline here is just wild. Within hours, the administration pivots, pulling out this obscure law from the 1970s to keep the pressure on. And that law, Section 122, it was basically a new weapon. It allowed for a 10% global surcharge, but with a 150-day clock ticking. And that put this immense pressure on trade talks with everyone, especially Canada. And right here, this is where the trash comes in.
All of this trade tension basically lit a fire under an issue that had been simmering for decades. We're talking about a literal river of refuse. Hundreds of trucks every single day crossing the border, carrying one of Ontario's most surprising exports, its garbage. I mean, just look at that number. Every single year, more than 3.4 million tons of garbage makes its way from Ontario into Michigan's landfills. This isn't a new thing. It's a deeply rooted, massive supply chain built around waste. To put that in perspective, that Canadian garbage makes up over 14% of all the trash buried in Michigan. That makes Canada the single biggest source of imported waste for the state, by a long shot. So you gotta ask, why Michigan?
And here's your answer. It's all about the money. It always is, right? Michigan's tipping fees, that's the price you pay to dump a ton of garbage, are just absurdly low. We're talking 36 cents. Compare that to its neighbors. It's an absolute bargain, which makes Michigan a paradise for Ontario's waste haulers. So of course, this economic reality has kicked off a massive political firestorm. It's basically pitted Michigan's governor against Ontario's premier in this high-stakes game over the environment, the economy, and who has to deal with all this garbage. So you've got these two leaders on a collision course. On one side, Governor Whitmer is trying to protect her state by making it way more expensive to dump trash there. And on the other side, you have Premier Ford, who's actually using the threat of a U.S. border shutdown to push his own agenda and fast-track new landfills back home. And he's not being subtle about it at all. Premier Ford has been using this exact scenario over and over again, what he calls the Trump threat, to basically create a sense of crisis and justify his government's pretty controversial moves. Ford's main weapon here is a piece of legislation called Bill 5. What it does is allow the government to skip the usual environmental reviews for huge projects, all in the name of achieving what he calls waste sovereignty. And the biggest example of this is the massive expansion of the York 1 landfill in Dresden, which got pushed through over some really strong local objections. Now you might be thinking, why doesn't Michigan just, block the trucks? Well, this whole thing gets really complicated because of one simple but super powerful detail in international law. And here it is. Here's the big legal twist. Under the USMCA, the trade deal that governs North America, your garbage isn't just garbage. It's legally classified as a commodity. It's treated just like lumber or auto parts. It's a product to be bought and sold. And that one little classification has huge consequences. Because trash is a commodity, Michigan can't legally charge Canadian trucks more than it charges its own local trucks. It's also why it can't just ban out-of-state waste entirely, thanks to a core U.S. legal principle that stops states from interfering with interstate commerce. So this gets us to the core problem. A flat-out ban is just not an option. That's why Governor Whitmer's only real move is to raise the tipping fees for everybody, Michiganders and Canadians alike. But as you can imagine, that's a really tough political sell. And as if all that wasn't enough, there's a massive deadline looming. In July 2026, the entire USMCA trade deal is up for a mandatory review. And you can bet that this whole river of trash situation is going to be a major bargaining chip for American negotiators. So where does that leave us? Well, we're basically caught in this precarious standoff.
You have Michigan on one side, running out of room for its trash, and Ontario on the other, running out of time. And there are no easy answers in sight.
And I mean, the stakes could not be higher. At the current rate, Michigan has about 21 years of landfill space left. But for Ontario, a border closure would be an absolute catastrophe. It would instantly shave 3 years off their landfill capacity and throw them into an immediate crisis.
One thing's for sure, the old way of doing things, just shipping trash across the border because it's cheap and easy, that era is ending. The real solution is going to require a total rethink of the system. We're talking about new ideas like localized waste-as-a-service models, using better technology and logistics to manage waste closer to home. Think of things like the 905 WOOD Digital Refinery workflow, which helps manage volatile transport costs. It also means getting serious about USMCA-compliance and making sure every shipment has a certificate of origin.
So ultimately, this whole fight isn't really just about garbage. It forces us to ask a really fundamental question. Is waste a shared commodity that should be traded freely across borders? Or is it a sovereign liability, something that each country or province needs to manage on its own? The way we answer that is going to define the future of trade, environmental policy, and the very relationship between two of the world's closest partners.